From a deadly generational stalker, a wife with dark secrets, to a scandal that lasted for over 30 years, this video covers 3 true new house horror stories. I'm Orikat and welcome to our channel. I deliver cases to you in the dramatisation format, so if that's something you enjoy, remember to like, comment and subscribe. As always, my aim is to give a voice to the victims and remember them as they were. So with that, let us begin. Sometimes the American dream comes with a nightmare attached, and the home on 657 Boulevard was no exception. In June 2014, Derek and Maria Broadus thought they had found their slice of suburban paradise. They had managed to get a great deal on what was effectively their dream house, a stunning 6-bedroom Dutch colonial home based in Westfield, New Jersey. It sold for $1.3 million. And so this beautiful property had a much more personal sentiment to Maria. As a child, she had grown up in the Westfield area, and now she'd returned. Her and Derek would be able to raise their 3 young children in the same way she was, in a lovely, safe, idyllic town. The house at 657 Boulevard stood proud, befitting of its worth. When you approached it, it was quite the spectacle with its grand columns and manicured lawn. Despite this, Derek and Maria did have their own idea of what renovations they would like to do. At the end of the day, it was nearly the perfect home, but not their perfect home. This was especially important for Derek, who really wanted his home to be a symbol of how hard he'd worked throughout the years. He'd originated from a modest background and worked his way up to becoming a senior vice president at a Manhattan insurance company. And he was so proud of himself over how far he had come, so the house would be an accumulation of this ambition. But the dream they desperately sought after began collapsing just 3 days after closing the deal. Derek was inside painting his new home when the first letter arrived. It had been posted through the letterbox, but when David went to check who slipped it through, there was no one there. When he looked at the envelope, it was simply addressed to the new owner. Derek thought this was strange, but he also thought perhaps one of the new neighbours was shy. But as Derek carefully opened this envelope, it would contain a message that would change his and his wife's lives forever. A writer, who declared themselves to be the Watcher, said he personally wanted to welcome the family into the neighbourhood. But through these words, it was soon revealed to Derek that this was certainly no ordinary happy-go-lucky neighbour.
Dearest new neighbour at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighbourhood. How did you end up here? Does 657 Boulevard call to you of its force within? 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched it in the 1960s. It is now my time. Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within the walls of 657 Boulevard? Why are you here? I will find out. I see already that you have flooded 657 Boulevard with contractors so that you can destroy the house as it was supposed to be. Bad move. You don't want to make 657 Boulevard unhappy. You have children. I have seen them. So far, I think there are 3 that I've counted. Do you need to fill the house with young blood I requested? Better for me. Was your old house too small for the growing family? Or was it greed to bring me your children? Once I know their names, I will call to them and draw them to me. Who am I? There are hundreds and hundreds of cars that drive by 657 Boulevard each day. Maybe I am in one. Look at all the windows you can see from 657 Boulevard. Look at any of the many windows in 657 Boulevard, at all the people who stroll by each day. Maybe I am one. Welcome, my friends. Welcome. Let the party begin. The Watcher.
Derek, feeling sick to his stomach, showed this letter to Maria, who was physically shaking by the time she had read it. They were utterly terrified. They had 3 children under the age of 10, and suddenly this house they had wanted to make into their own sanctuary felt like a trap. Though they were shaken up, for now they didn't think there was very much they could do. They had paid so much for the house, and they were in the middle of renovating it all, so they just couldn't leave. But now every moment in that house was filled with crippling paranoia. Derek and Maria didn't even feel that they could walk 2 steps without the fear of perhaps someone looking at them through one of their windows. And even more so because in the letter there was obviously that veiled threat to the children. So in the night they made sure everything was locked and called the police. To be doubly safe, they also hired private investigators and even reached out to the FBI. But despite all these assurances and individuals getting involved, the letters didn't stop coming. Over the next few months, 3 more letters arrived, each one aiming to be more disturbing than the last. This watcher seemed to know everything. Nothing was shielded from their view. They knew when the family was home, what times they left the house, and what they were doing in their day-to-day life.
657 Boulevard is anxious for you to move in. It's been years and years since young blood ruled the hallways of the house. Have you found all the secrets it holds yet? Will the young blood play in the basement? Or are they too afraid to go down there alone? I would be very afraid if I were them. It is far away from the rest of the house. If you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream. Will they sleep in the attic? Or will you all sleep on the 2nd floor? Who has the bedrooms facing the street? I'll know as soon as you move in. It will help me to know who is in which bedroom. Then they can plan better. All of the windows and doors in 657 Boulevard allow me to watch you and track you as you move through the house. Who am I? I am the Watcher and have been in control of 657 Boulevard for the better part of 2 decades now. The Woods family turned it over to you. It was their time to move on and kindly sold it when they asked them to. I pass by many times a day. 657 Boulevard is my job, my life, my obsession. And now you are too, Broaders family. Welcome to the product of your greed. Greed is what brought the past 3 families to 657 Boulevard, and now it has brought you to me. Have a happy moving day. You know I will be watching.
After this, Derek and Maria made the decision not to move into the house. It just wasn't a safe environment to bring the children into. But their hands were really tied. They couldn't sell it without disclosing the letters, and all this did was scare away potential buyers. They tried renting it out, but the financial strain was just too huge. But in 2019, 5 years after constantly living in terror, feeling like they were under the gaze of a microscope, they managed to sell the house for $959,000. This was a devastating $400,000 loss. Despite the amount of authorities involved, the identity of the Watcher remains unknown to this day. The case is still open, but is no longer active according to the Union County Prosecutor's Office. The Broaders family still live in Westfield, but this time in a different house, forever changed by their brush with an anonymous stalker who turned their American dream into a gothic nightmare. Money can buy you a lot of things. Some might even say happiness. But what it doesn't protect you from is tragedy. And the ghost of Greystone Manor can attest to that. Greystone Mansion was built in 1926 as a lavish wedding gift from oil tycoon Edward L. Doheny to his son Ned. At the time, Greystone Mansion was meant to be the crown jewel of Beverly Hills. It was a $3.2 million estate, sprawling across 18-degree Californian acres. Its greyish-green stones rose from the ground like an imposing Tudor castle, against the backdrop of Hollywood Hills. Now Ned Doheny Jr. had it all. The son of one of America's richest men, he practically had his choice of who to marry. And this free will eventually led him to marry a woman named Lucy Smith. She was the daughter of a local gas station owner, and he was smitten with her. So whilst his father continued to build his oil empire, Ned and Lucy travelled Europe collecting art and architectural elements to fill up their new home. By Ned's side, through all these new changes, was his trusted friend and secretary, a man named Hugh Plunkett. Ned had known Hugh since childhood. But beneath the mansion's magnificent facade, dark clouds were beginning to settle above the house. The Doney family became embroiled in the infamous Teapot Dome scandal. In the 1920s, the United States had many oil reserves. They were named teapots because of how the rocks looked. Now, these reserves technically belonged to all Americans and were supposedly to be saved when the country really needed them, like in times of war. Albert Fall was the man in charge of protecting these oil reserves, and he secretly took money from rich oil men like Edward Doney. In exchange, he let them drill for oil, letting them take what was meant for all, for themselves. When the scandal broke, there was massive fallout. Albert Fall was arrested and fined heavily. He would become the first ever US cabinet member to go to prison. Oil men, like Edward Doney, got into hot water too, but unlike Albert Fall, they had enough money to afford the best lawyers. These lawyers managed to convince a lot of people the oil tycoons hadn't knowingly done anything wrong, yet there were still a lot of people who didn't believe them. So though Doney Sr. was acquitted, the whole mess followed his family like a shadow. Then came the night of February the 16th, 1929. By this point, Ned and Lucy had only lived in Greystone Manor for 5 months, when in the dead of night, the mansion's marble halls echoed with the sounds of gunshots. And what happened next would become one of Beverly Hills' most enduring mysteries. Police moved quick, and the official story that broke was simple enough. Hugh Plunkett, possibly unstable from the stress of the ongoing scandal, murdered his friend Ned before turning the gun on himself. But there were certain details that didn't add up. For example, Plunkett's body was found face down, with a cigarette still clutched in his hand underneath him. How does a man shoot himself and fall forwards? And why would he be casually smoking during a time of such devastating violence? Then more questions were raised when Lucy Smith, now Doney, gave her own account of what happened that night. Her statement backed up the police's summary, but it was peculiar. She said she was sitting up late in the mansion's library, reading when the violence occurred. But after the shots were fired, this was when Lucy made some questionable decisions, such as phoning the doctor rather than the police. Her official account claimed that Plunkett wasn't of sound mind, and that he just flipped out and murdered Ned. However, one of the detectives was just too hung up on all the inconsistencies, despite the witness account. Regardless, despite the police having doubts, after just 2 days they ruled the case to be a murder-suicide committed by Hugh Plunkett. Though for context, there were suspicious circumstances which may have had some involvement on what happened to Ned and Hugh that fateful night. For example, Ned and Hugh were scheduled to give testimonies at Edward Doney's fraud trial. And then obviously people just can't get over Lucy's reactions during the night of Ned's death. If a friend had just murdered her husband while she was in the house, you'd think the first thing she would do was call the police. But no, instead, as I said, she phoned the doctor, and then on top of that, also decided to clean up a little bit. It was safe to say, after the case settled down, a lot of people began to speculate that despite Lucy claiming Hugh was the killer, she was hiding darker secrets. The bodies were quickly removed and the scene had been cleaned before a thorough investigation could take place. Allegedly, the Doney family's influence was what ensured the case was swiftly closed and labelled a murder-suicide. But to this day, the true nature of the crime is speculated. Was it really a simple case of a mentally unstable man killing his friend? Or could it be connected to the teapot scandal? Some whispered it was a professional hit to make it look like a murder-suicide. whilst others thought that perhaps Ned and Hugh shared secrets that someone wanted buried forever. Today, Greystone Mansion stands as a public park, its perfect gardens and elegant rooms open to visitors who may not even know the tragedy that went on there. But on quiet evenings, when the California sun casts long shadows through all the windows, some say you can still feel the weight of Greystone Manor's secrets. 2 bodies, 2 bullets, and a mystery spanning over a century. In 1966, a young woman named Raina Angelica Marroquin stepped off a plane in New York, carrying dreams as delicate as the artificial flowers she would learn to make. At just 27 years old, she had spent 3 years in the United States after immigrating from El Salvador and seeking a better life. She was drawn in by the promise of the American dream, but like many others, Raina became one who never got to achieve it. Now, Raina was known to be beautiful, absolutely full of life and skilled with her hands. She found work at Melrose Plastics, a factory that made artificial flowers in Nassau County, New York. The owner was a man named Howard Elkins, a respected businessman with a wife, children, and a pristine reputation in the community. But behind the facade of his perfect life, Elkins harboured dark secrets. Elkins began having an affair with Raina while she worked in the factory, and it was one born from a twisted power dynamic. Raina was vulnerable and far from home, whereas Elkins was powerful, already married, and used to getting exactly what he wanted. Their relationship remained hidden until Raina discovered that she was pregnant. But in a twist of events, in January 1969, Raina vanished. This was when she was about 9 months pregnant, days away from giving birth. No missing persons report was filed at the time. No questions were asked. In the city of millions, a missing immigrant barely caused a ripple. 30 years passed and Raina's fate remained unknown. But then in 1999, a couple renovating their new home in Nassau County made a chilling discovery in their basement: a 55-gallon drum. Inside, they found the mummified remains of a woman. She had been bludgeoned to death with a deep wound to the back of her head. Her front teeth were rimmed with gold, and she was in the final stages of her pregnancy. But to the people who had discovered her, the woman, whoever she was, seemed exceptionally clever and exceptionally aware, because in the barrel, with her body, were personal belongings: an address book, religious cards, and a resident alien card. So to the people who had found her, it really looked like this woman had known she was going to die, likely kept those belongings hidden on her. And through these details, the woman in the drum was identified as being Raina Marroquin. The investigation consequently led detectives to Howard Elkins, who was 70 at the time and living in Florida. And later, DNA testing would confirm he was the father of Raina's unborn child. When questioned by the police, Elkins did admit to having an affair with a woman at Melrose Plastics all those years ago, but he said he couldn't remember her face or what her name was. The day after the police questioned him, Howard Elkins drove to a parking lot and sat in his car for a while. He simply stared into space before taking his own life with a shotgun. He took many answers to his grave, but by all the physical evidence up until this point, the police were convinced he had indeed murdered Raina and their unborn child to keep his perfect life from unravelling. Theories around how Elkins killed Raina have circulated, the strongest one being that he lured Raina to his home and murdered her in the basement before concealing her body in the drum. He then moved away, leaving his dark secret forgotten, whilst he tried to make himself a new life. Today, Raina's case is a reminder of the vulnerable position immigrant women are in and their ongoing quest for justice. Rayna's voice, though silenced in 1969, spoke again in 1999, ensuring her story would never be forgotten. Thank you for watching. Comment down below what you thought the most interesting story was.